It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I am very, very excited to have this guest on and to talk about this topic. A while ago, because I am looking to do a video documentary on Yale and all the things around there, I took advantage of stopping at the Beinecke Library, and I figured while I was there, I was actually going to take out a very old occult book and just have a look at it. My main thing is to go back and to look at the Voynich, but I wanted to get an idea of like what kind of situation am I going through, what's the whole procedure, what's the rules. So I went to Beinecke Library and took out the R's, and I took some pictures and filmed it because I do think it is a very interesting book, and it's very old, and posted it on Twitter. And luckily, I guess because of maybe the hashtags, my man over here, Matthias Castle, came across it and retweeted it. And I looked at his account and I was like, oh, this guy's like all about this book. Like he's got a blog and that's what he does. And I was like, since I have no problem admitting it, I really have no idea what I'm looking at with this book. It's totally out of my league. And I was like, I would love to cover it, but I kind of feel like I just wasn't doing justice. And I looked at his stuff, and I was like, oh, this works out perfect. This guy has a book on it. So today, with co-hosting with me, I do have Lisa. What is up, Lisa? Thank you very much.
How's it going?
Oh, great.
Looking forward to this.
Oh, hell yeah, definitely. I've been looking forward to it since I've made the date with this man. But finally, to get to the guest. My man, would you like to, I guess, maybe if you want to, give a little bit of an introduction, I guess, like what you're about, and what even got you into, it doesn't have to be the R's, but I guess, like, what got you into even covering, like, occult grimoires, manuscripts, whatever we want to call them?
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me on. I got interested in religion and philosophy at an early stage. I studied those topics at college. So I got a bachelor's in religious studies and philosophy from Emory and Henry College, which is a small private liberal arts college in Virginia.
Very nice.
And I just had an interest in the esoteric, and just it's a rabbit hole. You can just keep on going and looking into all this stuff. So I came across the Robert Turner English translation of the Ars Notoria and found it rather confusing and fascinating. And I wanted to track down the original Ars Notoria from the 13th century. And I came across the work of a French scholar named Julien Veronese, and he had done a critical Latin edition of the Ars Notoria. He had surveyed over 50 manuscripts and have provided us with a critical edition, and I decided to translate that in order so I could understand how the Ars Notoria ritual is to be conducted.
Awesome stuff. And yeah, right. And if I knew, I would have probably had the chance to even get into stuff like this. I might have gone to college. I had no idea. It's funny how when you start looking at some colleges, even with Yale, I was I had no idea that some universities actually entertain occultism, but like it's not. I don't think it's blatant, but like they do entertain these things, and I was like, damn, I wish I would have known that. I might have actually gone to college and studied this shit instead. You know? But it is what it is. But you want to let everybody know as well. Please let everybody know where they can like find your stuff. You know, I know you do have like
sure.
blogs.
You can find me at MatthiasCastle.com. The book is titled Ars Notoria, The Notary Art of Solomon, a medieval treatise on angelic magic and the art of memory.
Very nice.
And it's published through Inner Traditions.
Would you like, do you want to, I mean, I can add it in the bottom, but do you want me to add like your Twitter handle as well? In case people ever want to contact you?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So all your stuff, I'll include the notes in the notes. So people listening or watching, if you want to get in contact with this man, or if you would like to check out the work that he has done, all his links will be in the bottom. Now to the Ars Notoria, and as we're talking, I'll pull up some pictures and we'll just go through them as we're talking, so the listeners can even, or the people watching actually, can see what the book looks like. But real quick, I'm just going to if you were to go on to Google and be like, what is the Ars Notoria? You're going to get the Ars Notoria is an ancient grimoire, which is a book of prayers and orations that is said to strengthen and focus one's mental powers by beseeching God for intellectual gifts. It is the oldest portion of the Lesser of the Keys grimoire. The book is not a book of spells or potions, but rather a book of prayers and orations that are said to strengthen and focus one's mental powers by beseeching God for intellectual gifts. Among these intellectual gifts is the concept of perfect memory. And then just a quick fun fact, it is also the name of a survival action RPG set inside an open world sandbox that lets you hunt powerful possessed creatures.
Awesome.
I figured I would just throw that one in just in case. But I was thinking maybe you could maybe add to that a little bit more. I mean, I know you kind of said it yourself before, real quick, about like kind of what the Ars Notoria is, but I'm sure you could give us a little bit more, I guess, an in-depth idea of what you even think the book is about, or the whole reason for it.
Sure. Yeah. Generally speaking, I think that sums it up pretty well. It is a book of prayers that was designed to help the practitioner gain knowledge of earthly and heavenly knowledge. So they want to study grammar, logic, rhetoric, the seven liberal arts, because this book probably circulated in the universities in Europe, particularly northern Italy. Probably the University of Bologna, which is one of the oldest universities founded in Europe. But it was a fast track to gaining knowledge, and people like shortcuts, and so these prayers are addressed to the angels, and the book itself has an interesting mythology in that it's, in a way, an expansion upon the biblical narrative of King Solomon from the Bible, in which he received a vision of God, and God said, "What would you ask of me?" And King Solomon asked for wisdom. And so the Ars Notoria basically expands upon that narrative and say, how did King Solomon gain that knowledge? Well, he gained it through the Ars Notoria.
Sure. I find it interesting how it doesn't have like any potions and spells. And I guess like the whole thing with this book, which like that's another thing that kind of interests me. But when it comes to ceremonial magic, I do feel like it's most, for me, if I want to be doing the right thing, it's more of like actual, I guess what this book would be about, having contact with God and being, given wisdom, or memory. Stuff
Right.
like that. And in my opinion, when I want to start messing with potions and spells and all that stuff to change the outside world, to me, as silly as it sounds, that's where it starts going into a little bit of what people would call black magic. But I do think as a real ceremonial magician, it is actually really all about the relationship with that person and God. You know?
And the Ars Notoria is very different. It only affects the practitioner himself rather than affecting the outside world.
Yeah, and that very much caught my interest with this. I guess a question that I wanted to ask you too. I mean, I guess it's almost like a silly question because you probably wouldn't have covered it. But I mean, I'm assuming you think that there is something like here. You know, there is like, if anything, at least someone trying to put their experience of coming in contact with God, at the very least. But like, you obviously do believe that there's actually some like legitimacy and there is, actual magic or that's happened.
Oh, well, I'm a researcher and a scholar, but I certainly believe that the people who composed and read and practiced the notary art seriously believe they were making contact with angels, and this was primarily through dream work. They would try to they would do their prayers and do their fasting, and they would go to bed at night and hope that they would receive a message from an angel who would then give them permission to proceed with the ritual procedure of the notary art and attain the knowledge that they seek.
Was there any specific angels that might have been associated with maybe like coming to them in their dreams and giving them any of this information?
Yeah, I'm sure there's.
Because to me that makes me think of Gabrielle right away, but that doesn't mean I'm correct. I'm just wondering, like,
Right. Well, there's certainly angels are messengers, and they certainly appear throughout the Bible. I think some of them could be interpreted as having been received through dreams. Perhaps Ezekiel's vision was a dream, or the appearance of Gabrielle to the Virgin Mary, that might have been a dream. I think there's some room for open interpretation on that. But the Ars Notoria itself, it claims that it had a specific angel or angels. There's a Pamphilus was the name of the angel who gave the notary art to King Solomon. And then there's supposedly 4 other angels that rule over or govern the notary art, and they are I can't pronounce their names because it's a bit complicated because we don't know how it's pronounced, but these 4 angels' names would be written on these laurel leaves with a saffron paste or ink, and then you would take the laurel leaves and put it in some rose water that would be made as a tea, and you would dip the laurel leaf in the tea and rub the name off of the angel into the tea, and then you would drink the tea so as to infuse the knowledge of these angels, or be able to attract and gain their favor as you proceed through the notary art procedure.
Yeah, I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
that's interesting. And most of these grimoires are, when you talk about magic or whatever, they indicate the 4 angels. They always indicate something about 4 angels this or 4 angels that. I know with like when we did the Saint Cyprian, the saintly occultists, he wrote a couple of books where he referred to having 4 angels as well. So it's interesting that it's, that theme comes up again over and over.
Yeah, the number 4 appears quite often in the notary art, and that may be related to these particular 4 angels. There are certainly other grimoires that have groupings of angels, whether 7 or 4. I see that quite a bit as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to ask, and I guess, kind of since we're bringing up numbers right now, again, I really don't, unfortunately, I really don't know the background, the history, where this book was, what idea and mindset was going on in that area, where they think it might have came from. But I know from the past, going into other, I would say grimoires and other occultists. At some point for a while, probably for a few hundred years, they very, very much were also into numerology and gematria and ciphers. Like a lot of ciphers are actually out there.
Right.
And I do wonder, are those things still being used? But do you think there's anything, because again, you were talking about translating it and maybe, trying to do it the best way. Have you ever wondered if there's any sort of cipher or way of like finding out other hidden messages in here with like adding gematria to it or anything like that?
Oh, that's certainly a possibility. I believe.
Not to put you on the spot, because I don't know if that's your thing. It's just,
Oh. Oh, I've written a little bit about numerology on my blog because there's some indication that it may have been a discipline of study for the notary art, one of those disciplines that you could learn. But the prayers themselves, they appear quite strange in the notary art. They are these mysteriously formulated prayers, and my hypothesis is that reading the notary art, King Solomon had received the knowledge from the angel about this exegetical method, or this method of interpreting scripture and formulating prayers, which is called a notoricon. And this is a method of, like I said, a method of esoteric interpretation of scripture. And it talks about ways of taking like a single verse from the Bible, for example, and then creating a single word to represent that verse.
Yeah, we talked about that
versa.
Stuff. Yeah, in the gematria series. That's very interesting.
And then there could be some sort of relationship to numbers with that notoricon, or that Jewish esoteric method of interpretation.
That's great that you even mentioned that word. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh, nice. And then wasn't there even other things like, I don't know if there's like different versions of that, or if it was like one other version that we covered. It could even, and it was funny, as I was like, oh my God, I've thought this myself before I even knew this existed, where you take like the first and last letter of a word, and those are actually like kind of like very meaningful, or it could
right.
So you have no idea. But I was wondering if you had entertained that thought that something along the lines, I guess, with numerology and ciphers, if there's even something in here.
That could certainly be relevant to the notary art, but I'm not sure. And part of the mythology behind this book is that King Solomon's book, he called it the Book of Flowers of Heavenly Teaching, which it was his compilation of all these writings that he made from his divine revelation from the angel. And that work was then passed on to the Greek philosopher Apollonius of Tyana. And Apollonius then decided to write his own commentary on Solomon's book. And Apollonius called it the Golden Flowers. And his Golden Flowers is just extracts, or excerpts, I should say, excerpts from Solomon's book. And then Apollonius then provides his own commentary, and then he even does some Latin translations from these strange prayers. So supposedly then Apollonius is the one who's decoding these strange prayers and understands the method which King Solomon used to formulate them. But now that is lost to our reader.
That was something I was thinking, and then you finally kind of finished what you were saying. I was like, oh, he pretty much said what I was going to bring up. there's things that me and Lisa have covered, and there was times where, to me, it seems that you had occultists that were actually translating languages due to numerology.
Yeah.
And that's how some texts were actually helped translated. So that's interesting that you just said that, because to me it's making me think that it quite possibly could have been a way that however this version or these quotes from it or excerpts from it were done.
Right. That's an interesting hypothesis, and I think that has some plausibility to it. Yeah.
Not to beat a dead horse. Is this the first time we see the Ars Notoria is from Apollonius that we know of?
Yes. Okay. So we don't have King Solomon's Book of Flowers of Heavenly Teaching. Okay. So we're taking everything from the word of this Apollonius. It's truly a pseudo Apollonius, because Apollonius was a first century Greek philosopher. So there's no way he could have written this, but whoever was writing under his name had claimed to have that knowledge of King Solomon's writings. Another thing I would say about the Golden Flowers is that it's actually incomplete. This is a fragmented text. And what has now happened...
I had thought that, because it's very short.
Is that you... I'm sorry?
I had thought that as soon as I saw the book, I was like, is this really the whole thing? You know what I'm saying? I was like, this is so small. I just came to the library to look at a pamphlet, really.
Right.
Considering everyone was verbose back then. Yeah. But
yeah. So anyway, what has happened is the Golden Flowers has accumulated these other fragmented texts, which is now very Christian in its appearance, and so that has now become what we call the Ars Notoria today. So you have the Golden Flowers and these supplementary texts with it. Now, out of the supplementary text, you have what I believe is a fragment of a letter of one person addressed to another, where the beginning of the letter and the end of the letter appears to be missing, but it addresses someone and says, I'm answering your questions about this, and this, about the notary art that you had. And in that letter, we have prayers about philosophy, and then we also have some tips and advice on how to approach the notary art. And then we also have what's called the Ars Nova, or the new art, which is these 10 prayers that can be prayed at any time. And it's basically a derivative text of the Golden Flowers, and it's much more convenient to the practitioner, because the Golden Flowers was very demanding in how you are to pray these prayers and when and so forth. So it's another short track to gaining that knowledge quickly.
So would you think that if it appears that some are missing, that obviously this existed somewhere else or came from somewhere else, like say, Greece or Egypt or anything like that? When more of the stuff was coming out of those areas during that period of time.
Right. Yeah. I believe that the Golden Flowers itself might have had a Byzantine Greek origin, perhaps Constantinople, or Haran, which was another city that had very hermetic texts floating around, circulating at that time. Because the reason why I think it's hermetic related is because this pseudo Apollonius of Tyana has other astrological and hermetic texts attributed to his name. And so you see these kinds of hints in the Golden Flowers in terms of what source material that was used. And then again, of course, the name itself, Apollonius of Tyana, you're thinking, you got to put yourself in the mindset of those people in the Middle Ages, and how they were thinking about the portrait of Apollonius. And so there's this hint that there's hermetic roots to this Golden Flowers.
Well, he left his signature. You know, whether it was a pseudonym or it was a collection of people, they all have the signature of what they were into. And so you see it kind of, the theme pop up throughout that work that's attributed to Apollonius. And so if you see Ars Notoria attributed to Apollonius, you almost have to question, well, you know, was this older and did it stem from like a Hermetic type basis? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, that was actually, I'm glad we got onto this topic because I did want to actually ask you, it was one of the questions I wanted to ask you earlier and I just totally forgot. Do you think it could be more than like one person, like a collective, or?
Oh, as far as the Golden Flowers,
Well, no,
I
I'm
would
saying
say
this
that
book itself.
the book itself, the Ars Notoria, I think there's several hands in this.
Yes.
Yeah, to bring it to the composition that it is today. So in which case I probably go back to speaking about the French scholar Julien Veronese, who surveyed all these manuscripts himself. And what he has determined is that there's basically two versions of the Ars Notoria. There's a version A, which is the short version, and the old original version from the 13th century. And then there's a version B, which contains these glosses or commentaries, which is much more extensive in its length. And that is from the 14th to 15th century.
I remember coming
so you have a
across
version
that.
A and version B.
You know what that reminded me of like the Grand Albert and the Petit Albert. You know, it's like one's like a more expanded version of the other. I was like kind of wonder, when I read that, that's exactly what I thought of. I was like, oh, okay.
Right. So, I mean, you got to think about the original medieval scribes here. They have this Golden Flowers. It's incomplete, so they have to supplement it. And then you have your version A, and that version A has some problems with it. It's kind of confusing, right? And so you have a version B if someone who comes along and says, oh, I'm going to write the commentary. I have some information on this book, and I'm going to explain each of these passages so that it's perfectly clear for anyone who wants to practice the notary art.
One of the things I also wanted to ask, do you think, and this is one of the things that I noticed when I was just looking at the book, how like some of the first letters of the paragraphs, you know, how like they're emphasized, and some of them, I don't think all of them, but there are some that I think are specifically always in the same color. Again, that almost kind of goes back to, I guess, maybe like a cipher or whatever, something to do with maybe Notory or gematria. Do you think that is like a significance as well, like the capitalization and the colors that are used? Like even when some is in red. I mean, do you think that all has an importance?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily related to a cipher.
Okay.
But I believe that the text that's in red is typically what we call a rubric, which means it provides instructions on how the notary art is to be carried out. Now, the medieval scribes will use different colors to help just your eyes to follow the text and know that, oh, this section's different, or, you know, to bring some significance or importance to it.
Almost like the ingredients, and then this is a procedure.
Right.
Really,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, in my book, we the publisher and I decided to go ahead and do the rubrics in red, just to kind of follow that same idea.
Like I said, I could see that. I mean, if you're like an occultist and an artist, I guess the best way to make an example, David Lynch. I have no idea if you're into David Lynch or Twin Peaks or any of his stuff, but in my opinion, and I think he's kind of pretty much said it himself. Well, he didn't say it's a cult, but he does say in some interviews, like when he does go off on his weird stuff, where it's like he'll drag something out and like just keep like making it obviously weird. He says it's because I want you to pay attention and catch and see what I'm trying to tell you. And that's one of his reasons for being so blatant or overboard about it. It's just like, even just out of pure like, what the fuck is this? Like, you're gonna look at it and pay attention, you know. So like, I'm even wondering, like, here on the screen, how you have like whatever that letter is on the bottom. Is it so overly done so like people, they're captivated and pay attention to that part? Could that even be something to like make sure like this is important? Make sure you read this.
Sure, it could be. The large letters, I think, just simply also note a paragraph.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And
or
a
just
section.
transitions too.
Yeah, right. So yeah, one of the if we think about parts, like some of these prayers, they're divided into parts, and so it would be easier for the practitioner to remember what to say, or when they're praying, because this is a book of memory, right? And some of these things, some of these prayers are rather long, and divided up, it's easier to remember.
And that's actually another thing that I did want to ask about the memory and wisdom. Just from like being an occultist or a magician, or whatever you want to call it. I do wonder, like, see, for me, when asking for wisdom, that seems to be or getting wisdom or having wisdom seems to be a byproduct of magic, I think. And that is when, if you believe that you're coming in contact with God or your higher self or something more divine than you,
Right.
After the fact, like I have said, even if I wasn't going into it with like, I want to know this, when I came back, I was understanding or knowing things more. You know what I'm saying? And what I'm getting at is like, that may not even have been the goal. It just happens anyway. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? I just may have wanted the experience of understanding God, and then after my experience, I seem to understand the world more, actually. So maybe,
Right.
am I still getting the same answer? Maybe I am, actually. But, am I really getting what I was looking for? I didn't look at it that way, but maybe I am. If I'm talking to God or thinking having an experience with God and I understand the world more here, I guess that kind of would be a normal side effect, maybe. But what I'm getting at is that the wisdom, do you think the wisdom could be like, what I'm getting at is I guess like not specific. Like do you think like it's just like the understanding of God, maybe, that it's looking for, instead of like I guess I'll go back to like the Goetia. Maybe there's certain demons you want to deal with because you want to understand the language of birds. You know what I'm saying? So like maybe you're not actually going in with a specific section of wisdom or understanding. It is just something
Right.
that comes upon you as a result of this magic or this practice. I know it was a
Yeah,
long, drawn out
I
question,
certainly
but
believe that this ars notoria, although it really emphasizes these disciplines of the 7 level arts, I believe that the practitioner, once they achieve that dream vision or visitation from the angel is probably going to provide additional instruction and wisdom about things that aren't even found in the ars notoria.
and then I even do wonder if maybe that it would even help understand the book more itself as you go along.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure, once you have that divine contact, you're going to have questions, and you would ask and see what kind of answer you get. Certainly there are modern day practitioners who have claimed to have these visitations with angels, and they receive answers that they would never have guessed or could have come up with themselves.
Yeah,
And, you also think back to like John Dee's diaries, right? Those the angels have their mysterious answers.
yeah, that sounds a lot like experiences that I've had. Like there was times where whatever I feel that I guess I had in a magical experience, and like things that I wasn't even like thinking about anymore, but like stuff from like the past when like maybe studying the Kabbalah or symbolism. It's like I know that's associated with that, and that means that. I don't understand why, but that's what it says in, you know, Crowley 777, or that's what it says in somebody's book. It's an association. I just don't understand it. And it's like after a magical experience, it's like something 2 years ago that I didn't understand and I thought about for a few seconds is now like popping into my head and answered. You know what I'm saying? And then it's like, oh, wait, well, now I can go back and look at other stuff and start seeing connections. And I'm like, oh, my God, I was there in my face the whole time, but I was never childlike enough to look at it so silly that it actually makes sense this way. Wow. You know, so it's like I do think like that if that starts to happen, could that even, you'll start seeing even more come out of this book.
Sure. You know, you just just have to do the work and see what happens.
Pretty much. Yeah.
You mentioned the 7 disciplines. That's probably not the correct word that you use, but you mentioned the 7 different categories, and it's funny because with the emblem book that we just covered, the Atlantifugians, they talked about touching upon that. And that even at that time, the amount of effort that was placed into learning the different like rhetoric and grammar and all these different types of disciplines was essential. And then kind of the book itself, you know, pressed on all of that. And then as well as all of the senses to be fully involved in the meditative process of processing this book. But they harped on the whole coming into this understanding or knowing these 7 disciplines that you're mentioning as well. So it's another thing with another book, how like they press upon the different topics of knowing.
Sure. Yeah. It's the 7 liberal arts, and they consist of grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. And those disciplines were inherited from the ancient Greek world, ancient Greco-Roman world, and to the Middle Ages. And that was largely in part to this philosopher named Boethius, who did some translation work from the Greek text into Latin. And after he had died, we had lost here in the Latin West access to the Greek language, and so everything was in Latin. And so it wasn't until about the time when the Ars Notoria had appeared on the scene in the 13th century that the Arabs were doing a lot of translation work of Greek texts into Arabic and Latin. And so when they had translated into Latin, Europe had now regained access to that ancient knowledge and of those disciplines. So they had access to the Greek work of Aristotle. And so that kind of sent Europe into this new intellectual age, or coming out of the Dark Ages. And that would lead into the Renaissance.
All right. There was another question. I hate to get, swing into something else now, but there's another question. The whole thing, even with the memory, which I think is like rather interesting. Do you think it was more of like, because with the book itself, I think it will help you, like you were saying, like memorizing all this stuff. I think just out of doing that, I think that also kind of starts to tune your brain a little bit. So I think that can even have an effect on you mentally. But I was wondering if it's like so much more of like maybe memory of the past as well that'll help start triggering memories that like maybe we forgot about that we had. Because like, times during my magical career, there could be times where it's like I lit up a certain incense, or like I made a certain blend that like triggered like a memory that I remember because it's associated with that smell. And it would be almost like I was in that memory for a second, like more vivid than I could have like imagined. And then it's gone. And I silly as it sounds, I do think those are things that like help you have a magical experience. It's almost as if like you're really digging deep into the back of your brain and like rewiring stuff and looking at it again.
Right.
So
No.
I'm wondering, like, is that like all a correlation too with this, like the whole memorization, like even another way to explain what I'm trying to get at, like that's so much in the OTO, but in the OTO, from my experience, you will have to memorize some stuff if you actually want to do things. And like I do think that is to kind of get your mind going. But like if you're in the Astrum Argentum, which I was not in, but there will be certain times where it's like you have to memorize like a whole chapter of like the Book of the Law, I think, and like recite it. You know, and
Right.
I mean, that right there was enough for me to be like, forget about it. How about let me recite 4 pages of my own shit, not somebody else, not some other dudes. But the whole thing is, if you can actually sit there and memorize something like that, I do think that actually does even help with like referring to memories again. You know, it does something to your brain. So I do like think like, again, is that even like more, is this like kind of like a mental practice to bring upon the magical effects as well?
Yeah, you bring up a couple interesting points there. So, I mean, scientifically, we do know that the olfactory nerve, our sense of smell, has a more direct link to the brain and to the memory. And so that's why smells are so potent for us and our memories. But as far as the notary art here, there was a practice called the art of memory. And in fact, the notary art in the version B calls itself, that this book, you could call it the art of memory. That would be another title, it says. And so the art of memory comes to us from the ancient Greek world, but may be shrouded in mystery actually. But there's a story about the father of memory in the Greek world, who was invited to a dinner party, and there was all these nobles and important people there, and there was I believe the building had crashed or something of that sort, and he was able to memorize where everyone was seated so that they could identify the bodies. So the art of memory has a particular practice. What you do is you take one of these symbols, like here I see on the right hand side here, you have the first figure of logic, and you got these circles and so forth. What you would do is you would have your textbook on logic, like say Aristotle, right? And you're reading the new material and you're saying, okay, how am I going to memorize this complex philosophy of Aristotle? I'm going to break it down into chunks, right? Smaller pieces. And you would convert each of those pieces into an image, something that you could visualize. Maybe it's something that's relevant to the philosophy itself. And you would take that image and place it in the figure, and you would go basically along a very particular route through the figure. So like maybe you have 10 different images that you've created in your mind that goes along this path in the figure. And so you would kind of imagine yourself walking down this road in the figure, seeing each of these images, and that would recall to your mind that information that you had converted into an image from your textbook.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does make sense.
100%.
Yeah.
That's like kind of like sigils. I mean, when people make their own little talismans, I really say that because that's a little bit more art. But I even think like as you're making that, you the whole time you're doing it, you're thinking about hopefully, every little thing you're adding to it has a meaning behind it. You know what I'm saying? It's not just, whatever. So, the whole time you're doing it, especially like if you're a ceremonial magician, you're going to, like for me, if I was making a talisman, I just go with Jupiter. It's easy. I would be doing it on a Thursday on the hour of Jupiter with the whole idea of intent of like every little thing I'm doing. So like that really is even, I guess like when I go to finally use it, that really does have like a character in it, or really has a lot to it. You know what I'm saying? Even though it may look bland, it may have a lot of meaning and depth as well.
Right. Yeah, I believe these notary art figures were personalized because the art of memory itself requires you to create these images, and some images may work better for me than it would for you, and vice versa. So we see in the version B manuscripts a lot of these little marks and squiggles that give me a hint that there someone was probably marking those bits of information that they were memorizing and putting it into the note. And then when they would inspect the note, they would do that visualization, that walkthrough, and be like, oh yeah, I remember that, I remember this. And then having the vision of the angel would probably have some extra benefit or gifts, whatever spiritual gifts the angel might provide the practitioner that would really accelerate their memory and their knowledge of what they seek.
I really think
Maybe
that's
maybe that's why they put gods to things, as a way to personify and remember what it was in the event that they couldn't remember or have the text near them. They could just tell the story, and within the story itself, you would remember the text.
Right, and a lot of times that had to happen when medieval students would go to their lecture halls because books were very expensive to produce, and the professor would read out of the textbook, and you might have some scraps of paper available to you, but a lot of times you'd have to memorize this material, because one of the ways, one of the most significant ways to get ahead of your peers and other students was to be able to debate topics, and you had to memorize, this authority said this, so that's important to support your argument and to defeat your opponent. And oh, look, the professor noticed that you won the debate. You're going to move up in the class or whatever. So, absolutely, oral tradition and memory was very important during the Middle Ages. Whereas today, we're in a very literate world. Everything's written down for us, and we don't have to memorize things as our predecessors did.
Well, I think another problem is like basically things like knowledge has gotten so simplified. You can understand everything in a meme.
Right. Right. We shorten everything.
Yeah. So. You know what I was thinking too, when you were saying about like the drawing and inserting yourself. To me, I mean, that's like you're like almost making your own personal tarot, in a sense.
Oh, that's
I mean, if you think about, because my opinion, I do think that tarot is just like kind of, I guess, art to alchemy in oneself with their spirit and body and whatever inside their head, their eyes, their brain, all that stuff. But like, but again, like if you're going to start doing art, I guess personal to yourself, and I don't know, I just saw a correlation in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting and good thought there, because the tarot is very is a lot of the images are open to interpretation.
See, that was a thing that even with me, I was really never huge into it, but I knew I was like supposed to like mess with them and play with them and try to look at them, and figure them out.
Right.
And so, I mean, I did on and off throughout, I guess my magical career. And that was one of the things I'd have to say after I started having magical experiences. Tarot, especially a few decks, to me, just like clicked. And I was like, oh, now I know what I'm like kind of looking at here. And it's like, again, it's something that I never, ever would it even have entertained. Like, I mean, even when I don't think people realize like the word occult. I mean, that goes back to your eyeball. Like, could there be some eyeball symbolism in some tarot decks? Who would ever really think of that? But I mean, it does make sense if you want to get into occultism.
Yeah.
So I'm just throwing that out there. Here's some other images. Did you want to like maybe say anything about this one on the left? On your opinion on like what's going on here?
That one is the second figure of Rhetoric, and then the one on the right is the third figure of Rhetoric. So what the angel says in the Notory art is, well, he answers King Solomon's questions about these figures. You know, like why is there, so many? Why are there 3 figures for grammar? Why is there 2 figures for logic? You know, and the angel gives some explanation that you would divide your knowledge or the discipline into each figure. So each figure had certain parts of that knowledge. So it's kind of hard to say what these 2 figures on the left and right are really about. I personally interpret the one on the left as all those circles that are in line to the left is like an audience, and to the right is this X figure with was it 6, 8 circles there might be the speaker, and that is his speech divided into parts. I don't know. But like I said, the golden flowers being fragmented does get, even though it's fragmented, it does give us some indication on what some of these figures contain. What's most clear is what's to be contained in the figures of grammar. So I explain that in my book. So.
Thank you. Yeah, there is one question I want to ask, but I do want to say this was probably, and I think I had mentioned it to you earlier, I was more kind of like interested in seeing the Voynich because I want to go to the Beinecke and look at that, and I want to bring a book of anatomy. And I could be totally wrong, and I could be, making an ass out of myself, making the claim now on the show. But I do question, like, is there some stuff in there that people take as flowers that might actually be inside of our head? This book, I guess when I kind of went to go look at it, I had maybe a little bit of that hope with this. But, like, I really didn't see it. But except for these pictures, I actually did question these. The one on the right, I kind of, like, question if it's almost like, and I think I've seen it done in Egyptian, but it's done a little bit differently. But in my opinion, it does kind of represent the way our optic nerves cross in our brain, in a sense. And then the one on the left, I did actually question if, like, where you said people, I was, like, wondering if that was, like, as crazy as this is going to get. I thought that might have been, like, the front of your eyeball where it had the aqueous humor. And then I thought that other thing was kind of like that's where the lens is, and that's where you start getting the reflection off the lens.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so like those were like the only ones that I actually kind of like saw that popped out to me. But I know that's like a little bit out there.
I mean,
to even make claims like that on a book like this, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's out there.
Yeah. These figures are quite mysterious, but yeah, these are supposedly related to the field of rhetoric.
Okay. And then the other question that I did want to get to that I think reminded me even when you're commenting on this picture on the left, something that I've and Lisa have seemed to come across recently when covering certain peoples or certain I guess times and the occultism and the idea and people's, I guess, opinions. But there seems to have been like a time where I guess you brought up like the 7 arts or the liberal arts.
Right.
Some people will say that actually really isn't supposed to be separated. You're supposed to understand all of that to get like the one answer to whatever you're looking for. You know what I'm saying? Like that's all those 7 things are how you get your calculation. And I'm wondering, like, is that maybe kind of being shown with what you were saying in a sense.
Yeah, the medieval understanding of the seven liberal arts is that all seven are under philosophy,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
philosophy is always seeking the truth. So all seven of these are seeking the truth. And there's an image of from the, I think it's like 15th century, of a painting about Boethius, who has received lady philosophy, where the philosophy has been personified as a woman, and she's trailed by the seven liberal arts, who are also personified as women, and they carry their own symbols for each of their disciplines. Like grammar carries a book on grammar, and astronomy carries a medullary sphere, and geometry carries a square. Things that represent their disciplines. But yeah, they're all seeking the truth. And the seven liberal arts were actually subdivided into the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which is your word arts, your verbal, and then the quadrivium, which is the four, your arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Those were your math or your number arts. And so that's where we get our like, remember our exams, right? We had to know our English, and we got to know our math, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we've inherited some of that, that way of education.
It seems like if you look at
partly why the notary art fell out of use is because the education system in the 17th century, with the scientific revolution, it just changed everything. Right. And people let go of the seven liberal arts as a categorization and moved forward, progress, right?
Yeah.
I heard somebody talk about the trivium and the quadrivium, and that back then it was almost expected and everyone was well learned, I guess, so to speak, and that by knowing all of the disciplines, not just the liberal arts, but also in the disciplines of science that are now in STEMs, what they call it, is that it was your way to be a free man, because you would be able to navigate through the world. And then now the way that the educational system is set up is that you're only taught exactly what you need to be taught in order to go into the workforce and then become that workforce. So when you were looking at, and that was the other thing, when you're looking at these books, look at them look at them in a way that the person that wrote them was familiar with all of the seven liberal arts, as well as the STEMs and so forth. And they had a deep understanding of all of those disciplines.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it, I don't know, my opinion, it could have been like separated. I don't know if it was done on purpose, but I don't know. It just seems like at some point, all of a sudden, like the way people were like learning all of a sudden got fractured. And I don't think I don't think people realize like now that we're not I don't think it's taught the same way in schools, put it that way.
Yeah.
I would
agree. It's just very interesting how that happened.
I would agree.
Yeah.
So when people look at a book like this and they don't know the seven disciplines and they don't know about biology, it seems such like a foreign concept. Versus back then, how many people would have understood it?
Yeah, so you bring up an interesting point, because the universities were primarily schooling young men, and usually young elite men. So the notary art would have been circulating upon the male elites. And when you talk about, you're saying that the liberal arts are about being a free man. Well, that concept comes from the Romans, because you have people that were slaves, or the lower class, right? And so the lower class were often taught what they called the mechanical arts or the practical arts, which included agriculture and tailoring and hunting and, things like theater, all these other. Medicine was sometimes considered a mechanical or practical art. So you had these other disciplines that weren't taught in the universities. They were, that would be through trade or guilds.
Very nice. All right. And this one other picture on the left, actually, and then I'll get off the eyeball stuff. But this one picture on the left, I did question that one bottom circle, only because of when I'm looking at the eyeball series. There was times I was trying to look up the zonules of Zin inside your eye. And like a lot of times you almost get like that kind of vision depending on which angle, which I'm wondering if the cross is even trying to tell you like cross section or something like that. Like at a certain angle, you'll almost see it as this. Like if you were to put it upside down, I have questioned, is that like what's really on top of like Tahuti's head? But that's when I start getting into eyeball stuff. That's just my theory. But I had actually thought maybe it was the zonules of Zin because it almost kind of looks like a bunch of brush or like logs or like twigs if you want to start, I guess, making art out of it. So, but there was a question that I actually had asked you prior, and that was when I went and took pictures myself, which I'll bring up. And you did actually have a reason for it. One of the things that caught my eye was these little puncture things down the side. And when I I don't know if people can tell on the screen, like at first I was a little like iffy about like what that was. And in my opinion, like if you're sitting there with the book in front of you, to me, it looks like he was even punctured with something like of a specific, like the same thing, like maybe almost something that was like in the shape of like a triangle or something. Like I don't think it was just like someone like sticking in a plain needle. Like it looks like the puncture had a shape to it. So I was like, this had to have probably been done on purpose and like not with like something cheap. But I don't know how to explain it in that way. But, it was something was done to this prior. And I was like wondering, and I made a joke. I was like, was it like one big quilt? And then they decided to put it into another book. And you had actually said it was possibly like it was done a different way to begin with, right?
Yeah, these
binding
pages were taken from the book was rebound essentially, yes. And so it has a new cover on it. So these pages are still from the 13th century. It's just been rebound. But those holes that you see, someone actually did take a needle and thread to thread and bind the book.
And you can tell, like in my opinion, it looks like a specific, just because of the puncture. Like it doesn't look like it's like a thin, like there was definitely something specific used to puncture that paper.
Yeah, it is the needle, a sewing needle.
That's interesting, yeah. I never thought of a sewing needle. Nice. All right.
That's very interesting. I had a quick question.
Sure.
Why the Ars Notoria of all of them?
I'm sorry?
Why the Ars Notoria of all of them to look at for you?
Oh, well, like I said, I was really interested in trying to figure out the ritual procedure from reading Robert Turner's English translation. And that his translation is based off a Latin text that was combined or compiled with some works of Agrippa, the occult writer. And that Latin edition had rearranged the material from version B. And it also included another derivative text called the Short Art, or the Ars Brevis, and combined these two texts. And I believe that the logic and why that anonymous Latin scribe had rearranged the version B material is because they were trying to get you to follow the method as it would be conducted. Unfortunately, you can't really understand that without reading the original version B. And so that's what kind of led me down this rabbit hole of doing the notary art. It was like, well, I want to understand what order is supposed to be the correct order. And so it was a puzzle to me, and I just got engrossed. And the more I got engrossed, I ended up writing and translating this work. So I believe now we have a clear understanding of how the notary art can be conducted. I looked at version A, and version A is somewhat incomplete in its explanation of how the notary art is to be performed. But looking at version B, I was able to fill in the blanks for version A and provide how that was done. So that would be a 2-month operation or template in which you would do the prayers and inspect the figures and for each discipline that you wanted to do. And whereas version B, what it has done is expanded the golden flowers procedure with the new art procedure. And so now you have a 4-month template to conduct the ritual procedure. So I feel that I have been successful in explaining step by step how the notary art was to be conducted in both version A and version B.
Very nice. I guess the question that I kind of wanted to ask you, that I think you pretty much answered yourself, but besides you, but of course, you're going to say that what you have is worth researching. But besides your work on this stuff and this isn't like, I guess, to like bash the other people's work in the past, but is there stuff that if people were interested in this, is there stuff you'd say like you maybe should not even worth reading because maybe it's incorrect, mistranslated? And is there stuff that you would suggest, besides your own, of course, that would be worth looking at if they're interested in getting into this thing?
Yeah, I think a good resource is the Esoteric Archives by Joseph H. Peterson. He has that Latin edition that I mentioned from the Agrippa's collected works. He has the Latin edition side by side with the Robert Turner English 1657 translation. And what he has done is he has pointed out the different section numbers that were established by the French scholar Julien Veronese. So you got section 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And so you can look at both the Latin and the English there. And so I think that's a good resource. And that's a lot of times, really for the notary art, that's how most people are, if they're familiar with it at all, is through that Robert Turner translation. So that's a good place to start.
Okay. All right. And so I guess maybe just to maybe get like your, I guess, like final opinion, you do think there was like something of value to this book or to these writings? There is legitimacy to this, and it has some, I guess, maybe occult secrets.
It certainly has kept some of its secrets over the centuries. Like I said, some of these figures are mysterious, and some of the prayers are mysterious that have been deciphered by this pseudo Apollonius. And I believe we've been able to uncover some of those secrets and provide opportunities for further research, as this has now been translated for anyone who wants to do the deep dive into the notary art.
Very nice, very nice. And let everybody know, besides me putting the link in the bottom, let everybody know where they can find that work of yours about this.
Yeah, the book can be found at any retailer and wherever books are sold. It's called the Ars Notoria, the Notary Art of Solomon, a medieval treatise on angelic magic and the art of memory. You can look me up at my website, MatthiasCastle.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I had a really good chat. Thank you very much. I appreciate you both for coming on. That's the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.